Okay. Hello and welcome everyone to Learning Trees Agility as a Key Enabler in your Digital Transformation webinar presented by Marguerite Bryan. Today's presentation is going to be broadcasted via voice over IP audio only. So please feel free if you have any questions to type them in the chat pod and we will get to them at the end of the presentation during our Q&A session. Marguerite has worked in computer science for over 25 years, and she has worked in Agile for 18 of those. She is a leader in this industry, and we are very glad to have her here with us today. I will now turn this over to you, Marguerite.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Amy. And in addition to working in various facets of computer science, I've, also had the opportunity to branch, into portfolio, a PMO, some of the other organizational elements that make IT function optimally. So I look forward to bringing all of that into the presentation today. But first of all, let me welcome everyone and thank you for joining. I hope to make the session engaging, informative, and hopefully a bit enjoyable as well. Perhaps those of you on the East Coast have a sandwich or a little bit of lunch. On the West Coast, maybe a second cup of coffee, but regardless of where you are, I hope you can sit back and hopefully leave this with a new perspective or a new element to your perspective on the digital age. Now, I'd like to start with a question to you all that we're going to do through a poll. And this helps you to engage with the system a little bit. There'll be a couple of times during the webinar where I'm going to ask you a question. And this one is just to kind of kick off with the question, so how is the digital age treating you? So if you look at your screen, if you will take just a moment to reply, it really is our sense of where we are, in the digital age, both personally and professionally. And I will, as you find this and respond, let me say that I think in all honesty, some of us feel a bit buffeted around, right? Suddenly, our teenagers know way more than we do. Of course, that's not new, but it's certainly been exacerbated by this unending access to information that everyone has. As business owners, we're now expected to maintain dynamic Twitter accounts. We're supposed to be tweeting regularly. We have to, manage Instagram and Facebook just when we got our websites and LinkedIn profiles set up and stabilized. Or perhaps you've even experienced business disruption in some way directly. Perhaps you've worked for a company that got left behind. It's a very sobering experience to see a great company on its knees, particularly when family income or insurance is tied to that enterprise. But on a lighter note, most of us are discovering incredible new capabilities in the palm of our hands that have a direct impact on our quality of life. For me, as a trainer and a consultant, my travel apps, how I manage my receipts, my bookkeeping, all of that is now enormously simpler and faster than it used to be when I had to carve time out at my desk and go through receipts. This is all now handled basically on my phone instantaneously. As a homeowner, I can manage my HVAC, lights, security from anywhere at any time through my phone. And certainly as a consumer, the world is my oyster. I can compare prices, find discounts, print return labels instantly and easily. That's not mentioning everything I get from Lyft, Uber, Airbnb, StubHub, ShubHub, all of the different apps. If we were in the room together around a table, I would ask each of you to consider what is the phone app that's made the biggest difference in your life. And I'm sure that there's several. But really, this is just scratching the surface, because by all agreement, we are now entering into a very different era. And this is considered to be now the fourth industrial revolution, which is characterized by exponential advancements in our human capabilities. If we just take a moment to review the first three, we remember that the first industrial revolution was when we replaced animal and human power with water and steam in the 18th century, and this began the mechanization of our production capabilities. The second was when we added electricity, electrical power, and this began to launch mass production and assembly line type capability. In the third industrial revolution, we added electronics, our basic capability to automate production and support business functions. But these capabilities are also now many decades old. And we have now entered into an era now recognized as the fourth industrial era, where we have a fusion of technologies that are starting to blur the lines between the physical, the digital, and the biological spheres. Now, some of the characteristics that are most compelling is that what we're seeing is disruption across all industries and sectors. Medicine, very hopeful, promising advancements in medicine and medical sciences. Engineering, manufacturing with what is known as additive manufacturing, sometimes better known as 3D printing, but in the more broad sense, additive manufacturing, both and across our social and public spheres. There are now fundamental changes in how we consume services and products, and how do we engage with our customers, with our partners, with our employers, and with our employees. And one of the fundamental characteristics or most compelling is that we're engaging anytime, anywhere, and on any device. What we're seeing is that our brands now are themselves defined by these customer experiences that we deliver digitally, predominantly online and more on the phone, mobile devices. So really IT's legacy, which is in hosting business-facing applications in the service of business functions, has profoundly changed, because IT is now responsible for customer engagement, which is in effect the brand which delivers and the delivery of the mission itself. Unfortunately, though, many organizations still hold IT as a cost center, very separate, reporting up through finance or some other controlling function. IT may have a seat at the table, yes, but it's still not the grown-up table. And we also see so many enterprises really have no cohesive vision for aligning the customer experience across their various engagement channels or devices. No forward-looking plan to harness the emerging technologies. So we know that the rate of technological advancement, we're struggling in many organizations to catch up. But how about looking ahead as to the 2, the 3, the 5-year horizon of what technology capabilities are there? So not only are we struggling to look ahead, but we're relying on the same accounting, governance, product and project management models that were introduced decades ago, some a century ago, in support of very traditional manufacturing environments where there was no change. Now, the impact of all of this is certainly the focus of a number of studies, right? And so let me just speak briefly to two of those. So Washington University, the Olin School of Business, came out with a very, impactful study that predicted that 40% of the Fortune 500 companies would no longer be in existence in 10 years. Now that study actually is 4 years old now. And I wonder if that study was to be redone, if the number 40% gone in 10 years might just be higher. And here's another piece of data before we move on. One of the most notable Forbes economists, a gentleman, Steve Denning, he observed that 50 years ago, the life expectancy of a Fortune 500 company was about 75 years. Today, the life expectancy of a Fortune 500 company is right around 12 years and dropping. So this is what brings us to what digital transformation really is. And why is it imperative to survive and to flourish in the fourth industrial revolution or era, excuse me. So digital transformation is really a complete remastering of the business DNA. And that is around a clear understanding that technology carries responsibility for delivering your brand. It is the reputation, it defines the reputation, the relevance, and the value of your brand. The digital customer experience is the brand. So, establishing these bi-directional, the need to establish bi-directional engagement with customers, not only the need, but the opportunity to connect with our customers in real time, anywhere, anytime, on any device, without brokers or intermediaries. This has powerful implications. One, of course, is that it requires continuous operations. Right? Gone are the days where we used to take the big mainframe apps down for the weekend for upgrades. With our digital economy, we need to have our systems up and running continuously and with seamless integration with our other customer channels, our partners, and certainly our supply chain. Digital transformation is also the adoption of new methods, skills, and new tools that are required to not only deliver continuously to the customer experience, but to continuously experiment and learn from the resulting software experiences. This is also radically different than the IT world of yesterday, where experimentation was not a word we used at all, I might say. Certainly not in my experience. But digital transformation is really recognizing and that software-driven customer engagement is at the heart of the business itself. And this is transformational change of the enterprise. It is not small incremental change for IT in terms of upgrades and this kind of thing. It's a transformational change of the entire enterprise. So let me ask you another question. Let's have another one of those polls. What do you think is the most important element to support digital transformation? If you'll take a look and Okay, great. I see some responses around leadership, vision, commitment, and ongoing engagement. And it looks like that's we have not only consensus but unanimous agreement, and I'm delighted for that, because indeed the leadership, engagement, and commitment, well, first commitment and then ongoing engagement to the digital transformation is indeed the most fundamental characteristic of a successful enterprise. But let's take a look at some of the other elements of a digital enterprise. Okay, now my representation of a digital enterprise is a house. That's not an original metaphor. It's been used before, and for those of you who are familiar with lean, you might recognize this metaphor for the house of lean or others, but it's probably used because it just works so damn well. But let's touch on these elements very briefly, and then we're going to step through each in just a little bit more detail. We talked about leadership, and certainly leadership provides the foundation upon which any transformation is built, certainly one as expansive and disruptive as a digital transformation. Without leadership, there is no transformation. Now, in terms of culture, being the values, the attitudes, the standards, beliefs, and behaviors that characterize an organization and define its nature, well, this is how we operate in an enterprise. It is leadership, of course, has the responsibility for building a strong, healthy culture that we'll talk a bit more about this, but that promotes experimentation, promotes thought leadership, promotes ownership of problems. Then let's move to the technology stack. I thought for a moment about naming this technology modernization, but of course that's so relative. What we really want to focus on with our enterprise architecture or our technology stack is enabling technologies, technologies that enable automation, experimentation, scaling, continuous delivery, a loosely coupled architecture, all of these concepts that now enable an organization to be more responsive to their customers. These are capabilities that we sometimes refer to as a modernization of IT, but really it is an enabling technology stack. Then we get to data science, which is so important relative to our ongoing analysis of the digital sphere and our engagement in that sphere, and the more frequent, very disciplined, data-driven decisions that we're making. Because if experimentation is at the heart of innovation, and I certainly, amongst others, believe it is, data science brings the rigor so that we have validity and integrity to our experimentation. And then enterprise agility. Of course, that gives us the ability to shift quickly based on changing circumstances or opportunity. And then as the roof, you see the customer experience. This is the true north for any digital enterprise, and how we now deliver to the mission. So let's take a look at these briefly, just in a little bit more depth. The leadership in a digital enterprise. I don't know if you're familiar with the theory X and Y, but there was social psychologist Douglas McGregor in the 1960s who did a study and characterized management by two different styles based on their fundamental beliefs. Theory X was one belief and one management style. Theory X is believing that people are basically lazy and that without the carrot and the stick and a short leash, that people will just take advantage and not do work. That's the Theory X in kind of an abrupt nutshell. Theory Y, on the other hand, is the belief that people are innately motivated to do good work and to solve problems and to take ownership. And it's interesting, even though that this study is 60 years old, there's more and more supportive evidence, particularly in the area of knowledge workers who are at the heart of a digital enterprise, that the leadership style of enabling people with a sense of purpose, giving them autonomy, and allowing them to develop mastery, that these are fundamental to the health of a digital enterprise. So that's not one of the ones on the bullets, but to have leadership that adheres to the belief that people are innately engaged by in their work and want to do well. This is the leadership mentality and the leadership style of the digital era. We, of course, also want leadership to have a vision of and a strategy vis-a-vis the digital landscape. It is a different world, and it requires a sort of a risk-taking disruptor mindset to be able to maneuver an enterprise through the opportunity. And when we say digital mindset, we're thinking of someone who gets excited about the opportunity, not intimidated. And certainly leadership providing a North Star. These are qualities that we recognize not just in the digital sphere, but certainly across any mission, that leadership providing that common purpose is an imperative for companies who are going to be successful. Now, as I mentioned, technology is not slowing down. Now we're looking, beyond big data and cloud, and starting to get into the realm of services. Of course, it's already here that know your location, that predictive, but we need leadership to be looking out ahead and being able to attract and hire change agents to support their organization in the transformation. And then lastly, of course, leading by example. To survive, to actually flourish in this fourth industrial era, we have to be able to demonstrate. Leadership has to bring about a culture of transparency. I say disciplined risk taking. We'll talk about that a little bit more under data science, but decentralized decision making, empowering people to respond to information without building in cumbersome delays in approval processes. All of these things that you see leading by example are incredibly important to take an enterprise into a position where they're taking advantage of and flourishing in the digital era. Now, culture. Peter Drucker, for those of you who've studied management theory and so forth, Peter Drucker is one who has, of course, a number of very fine books, but he's very well known for this one statement you see: culture eats strategy for breakfast. And it's a nice way of summarizing the harsh reality that one can have a mission statement or strategy that we will be the innovative company of, the next generation, or all of these mission statements that say things, and yet often what we see is that the culture in the enterprise actually suppresses risk-taking, experimentation, um, learning. Often I work with companies where they're still, of course, referred to as postmortems. At the end of a project, the postmortem is really there to identify who, is responsible for that change in scope or schedule. Well, when we have a culture that isn't looking, to blame, but instead is looking for the lesson, how do we evolve as an organization and grow? This is what we mean by culture. It's not what you say, it's really what you do. And that starts with shared purpose. It starts with a sense of what the values and transparency, trust, and collaboration are cornerstones of the modern digital enterprise. We'll touch on these a little bit more, but all of these values that then are enshrined in practices, but they're first and foremost part of the culture. And of course, to build as part of the culture an external orientation. We don't want to simply measure our own business function or our own what's known as vanity metrics, which are metrics which tell us about ourselves. We want to have our focus outside of our enterprise with the customer. And then, of course, providing a culture that promotes mastery, promotes autonomy and innovation, and the ability to challenge the status quo without feeling that you are compromising your position in the company. These are all cultural elements of a digital enterprise that don't just happen because you write a mission statement that includes the words digital or agile. These are hard-won cultural changes that come through a determined engagement of the leadership team. Now let's talk about the technology stack. And those of you who've been in the technology industry for a while, like I have, you'll recognize the bullets under fragile elements of architecture, right? Those large, monolithic, often proprietary applications that were big, and by God, if you wanted to make a change to one, it was going to be a major undertaking. This is what we refer to as sort of these tightly coupled solution architecture. We also were maintaining multiple disparate platforms because most of our apps were proprietary and you needed a different platform for each of them. We also maintained, and still I shouldn't say past tense because of course I work with many clients who still have very siloed IT functions. So you might have a group for this platform, that platform, network versus servers, the classic, we don't talk, they do that, throwing it over the wall, and lots of manual, high-touch provisioning services, right? So to get a little, all of that is now very difficult inhibitors when a company is trying to shift its focus to the digital sphere. Because now, I'm certain everyone understands the realm of, more loosely coupled architectures, microservices. So we have small pieces of code that do very small things that work together that can be swapped out. They can be improved. It allows a great deal more flexibility in terms of being able to enhance, upgrade, repair, replace, because we're not dealing with these big monolithic code bases anymore. And we have built a continuous deployment pipeline that enables us to push code out from idea to production in a much smoother continuous flow. We have to get our arms, of course, in enabling technology around big data and analytics, because this is I've talked a lot about experimentation, and I don't mean experimentation that is not based on the right management of our data, the right development of our analytical tools. And then, of course, we have a whole new opportunity to be more scalable with platform as a service, infrastructure as a service, all of these now X as a service consumption models allows us to respond more quickly when we see an opportunity. So a digital enterprise is not making one big bet, we're making lots of little bets. But when we conclude on our go forward investment, we need to be able to scale quickly as well as to reduce. So this is where some of the most notably cloud services, but also the accompanying tools that allow us to spin up environments and spin them down become fundamental enablers to the entire digital focus. And of course, automation. So let's now take a look at data science. And before I begin, I'd like to point out that there is a on-demand webinar on the Learning Tree site by a data scientist by the name of Andrew Tate. And he does a wonderful job of kind of dispelling some of the hype and the general misunderstandings of what data science is. And I enjoyed it very much and hope that, you know, I do some justice to this topic, but please, if you have a chance, register for that on-demand video of Andrew's, because he takes it a whole different level. But we are now, you know, in a different world vis-a-vis data science, because we have cheaper, more reliable storage, and of course that's been happening now for a while. But we not only have cheaper, more reliable storage, but we have much more powerful compute. It's much more accessible now, particularly with cloud consumption or these new flexible consumption models. We've also got all of this data from the Internet of Things feeding us, you know, tons of information from sensors. We've got social media. And if we're developing our software correctly, we have telemetry in our own software that is informing us of how our software, how our services, I should say, are being consumed. All of this is very important information. And what we still bring to bear here, this final point, decision science, this is where Andrew makes such strong points, is we can talk about data, big data, small data, structured data, unstructured data, photos, images, but the bottom line is that we fundamentally still as an enterprise have the responsibility to construct our analysis of that data with prudence and an understanding of the business context and an understanding of statistics such as sample size. So really bringing all of these elements together is what we now refer to as data science. But the last, which is decision science and analytics and statistics, is as important as, you know, the vast amounts of data we're able to collect, because ultimately what we're driving for is useful insights. Because again and again, I've mentioned experimentation at the center of a digital enterprise, and experimentation is only of value, it is only useful to us if it has rigor behind it. Just like in scientific journals, if a study is published, it is only published after other scientists have evaluated the sample size, all of the different elements. And so we want to bring that rigor into, we must, into our digital enterprise if we're going to truly proceed with data-driven decision making and move away from the gut or the politics and so forth. And then as a final note, of course, we get into some of the advanced machine learning, predictive analytics, etc. But here again, warning, these are very powerful tools, but they require that we bring to bear an understanding of the context, because if we're teaching an analytics program basically what to look for, it's going to learn based on what we give it. We're humans, we have bias, we have only certain amounts of data. So it is very important that we employ data scientists, whether by that name or a different, to help us ensure that we're using the incredible capabilities that we have today because of advancements in technology, but we're using it to ask the right questions in the right way with the right data. Some people, I think, would like to believe that we simply kind of have a big funnel and all of this data just, is sucked in, and then useful insights come out the other side. And unfortunately, it's just not that easy. But fortunately, the field of data science merges the analytical discipline, the statistical rigor, and the understanding of the business context in order to draw out those useful insights. So now our third and final poll question, because I'm going to move to the last pillar here. The third poll question is, what is Agile? And I'd love to get some of your impressions before we step into that material. Y'all are all so good. Okay. No one thought it was a religion yet. Some people act like it's a religion, but in fact, very interesting. I see most folks are pulling mindset based on a set of values and principles. Okay, very good. Thank you. I hope that these polls are just another way to kind of feel more engaged. It certainly makes me feel more engaged with you. But let's go ahead then and move on to agility. Pardon me? Okay. So I apologize for this busy slide. I know it's like it could be an example of how not to build a slide, but there are really three main components to this slide. In the upper right, you just see a distinction of being agile versus doing agile. And I like this image because it talks about graphically that agile is a mindset that is, yes, based on values and principles, but practiced through different frameworks or methods. And this is very important to understand. Now, what are those values and principles? And that's the image on the left, the Agile Manifesto, written in 2001. This was when a group of leaders in the software industry came together and really focused in on what were the best practices, leading practices that were enabling software development to be more successful, frankly, in an era where adaptability, where responding to change was becoming really a primary factor in the success of huge initiatives. So anyone who is very interested in Agile, I really encourage you to take a look at the Agile Manifesto. Now, the Agile Manifesto sometimes is misrepresented because of the value statements. Let me give you an example. We value working software over copious documentation or comprehensive documentation. Does that mean that Agile environments or Agilists don't believe in documentation? No, it doesn't. But the emphasis is on the left, the items on the left, but it has allowed people who are new to the field to kind of misrepresent a little bit what the Agile Manifesto is saying. So, the best way to move forward in the Agile world is to start with an understanding of the values and the intention and the principles that are really focused on around collaboration, around iteration, around learning. And then you have a better sense of what do we mean by mindset, because it does become a way in which you view problems to solve or opportunities to seize. Now, finally on this slide, you see the umbrella with all of the individual methods, and so you can't really see them, but under there would be, there'd be Scrum would be a big one, Kanban, DevOps, Scaled Agile, Less, Safe. There's lots of different methodologies out there. But the key is to understand that as long as they support the values and principles, then you're on track. But it's best to be guided by the values and principles rather than a particular framework. Now, I'll give you just a moment to look at this quote by Charles Darwin. I think it is very compelling to me as we understand now complex organizations and the need to be adaptive in this world. And it is enterprise agility here that enables us to do this, to respond to change as an entire enterprise. I'm not talking about a Scrum team. I am not talking about one or two or three teams. Enterprise agility is the ability to thrive in a continuously evolving environment. And we do this through rapid experimentation, learning, and adaptation. For some of you, that may sound familiar: plan, do, check, act. The Deming cycle. It may sound familiar for those who studied, the scientific method of hypothesis and so forth. These are the core tenets of adaptive organizations. And just to touch on one of them very fully, this hypothesis-driven experimentation. If we make our investments based on business cases that are full of assumptions, and I have done that many times in my career, I think most of us have, it is a very powerful transition to change your thinking from building a business case or a ROI to proposing a hypothesis and a means to test that hypothesis through experimentation. It's a very different way of approaching opportunity. And it's one that can be very exciting and liberating when it comes to taking risks and chances. So I will just summarize with a few points. I don't think that I know an enterprise for whom some form of digital transformation is not an imperative. This includes private, public sectors and across, and I work with many. And interestingly, regardless of the mission, it has become an imperative to be able to manage that mission in the digital sphere. So much depends on leadership. When I work with clients who say, oh yes, we have a great grassroots effort, And I commend them and I applaud grassroots efforts. That's fantastic. But it will so be impeded if the leadership is not building the organizational structure and culture in support of those agility and experimentation. And of course, the IT capabilities. There's many different strategies for IT modernization. Certainly, usually people end up with a more gradual approach unless they're highly capitalized. But to have a roadmap, identify which of the capabilities are most critical to the ability to experiment and learn from customers, using data science to continuously evolve, but in a disciplined way with rigor. And that's why my hat's off to all the data scientists out there, because they are what help us to remain grounded in the right questions to ask, the right business context to have for our analysis. So if you saw a lot of synergy between agility, the ability to rapidly experiment, learn, shift, evolve, with what a digital enterprise actually is, it's because indeed the lines are blurred. You cannot have a digital enterprise without having an agile capability set, an agile mindset. It just doesn't work, but it is that agile, iterative, continuous exploration that enables the digital enterprise to not only respond to the things that are happening in the customer environment, but to start to apprehend and to in advance be positioning the next set of experiments and scaling up the next solution. So of course, there's quite a number of courses and material for you to leverage. I do highly recommend always that people spend some time with the Agile fundamentals before jumping into enterprise agility, because building enterprise agility with one of the different frameworks, Scaled Agile being one of them, without an understanding of the core concepts and the why behind the what, it feels a little shallow to spend, a great deal of time and money implementing a framework. It is so much more meaningful when you understand the whys behind it. So now I wonder, while we have a few minutes left, if there's any questions that I might take. Okay. And I'm not sure if there's someone there who would read from them. Okay.
Hi, Marguerite. I'm seeing quite a few people typing right now, so we'll give them a minute or two to see what their questions are.
Great. Great. What are the best Agile courses to take? Oh my goodness. I did speak to a moment ago how important that the fundamentals are. I know I get very excited when I want to learn something, and I am ready to jump to the advanced. I just think, oh, I don't need that. But with Agile, as I mentioned, if you don't understand the core principles, it will not be meaningful when you start to reach for the actual practices. Scrum is where often people start. But again, I would suggest some level of understanding of the Agile foundations or fundamentals, I believe is the specific class. From there, of course, one can work on team level agility, and that is either Scrum or Kanban, depending. But then when you really start getting into enterprise agility, which is where I get very excited, you have a couple of choices. The Scaled Agile framework is the one that is at this time the most widely adopted. It is one that I help a number of organizations to be successful with. But always grounding in the fundamentals is a wise choice. Even if it feels like you're starting at ground zero, it will be an investment that will help you down the road. Okay. How to evaluate if the leadership team is on board with Agile. Oh, if you don't have access to them, ouch, that makes that question hard. Well, I would suggest that even, watch what they do and not what they say. So if you don't have access to them, look for signs like, do you have an Agile or Lean Agile Center of Excellence? That is very telling because is there a centralized Agile transformation program? Who's running it? These are outward visible signs that the leadership team is committed to the transformation. Because without having some center of excellence, which is different than a community of practice, a center of excellence is really chartered with setting the standards, building out the transformation plan, etc. So I would think those are two immediate things. Is there a group chartered with the Agile transformation, and what level are they at? And I don't say that because of hierarchical kind of, but generally if it's teams only doing Scrum, maybe the commitment is not to the fuller Agile transformation because it involves so much more than a teams operating. The teams have to have alignment with the business planning and the strategy and the customer. It all comes into alignment, which is why typically the newer digital enterprises are much flatter organizations because there's much more direct collaboration. So organizational structure, is it starting to flatten? Do you have a Agile Center of Excellence or transformation committee? That kind of thing, there are sometimes telltale signs. Oh, how do Agile principles translate into the sales arena? That's a great question because Agile principles are now starting to be adopted in many other areas of the organization. HR is one. There's many books written now. I'm not in HR, and I'll get to sales, but let's think of it real quickly. If Agile is all about continuous learning, continuous improvement, how does a once a year big bang, okay, you did this right, you did that wrong kind of evaluation, how does that fit? It doesn't fit very well. In some organizations, and it's okay, the once a year performance evaluation. But what if we were focused on a more continuous engagement of learning and improvement, let's say? So that's just one of the real obvious ones about how it's impacted HR. It's a much more continuous process instead of, hey, we're not going to talk to you until next performance evaluation, and then brace yourself because you're going to hear it all. Now, in terms of sales, anytime where we break down this pattern of planning out a whole year, and here's your budget for the year, and here's your targets for the year, and we don't care if anything changes, because by God, all we're concerned about is our ability to predict and then our ability to hit what we predicted accurately. That's kind of the old traditional way of looking at things, where we set a budget and it's all about hitting that budget regardless of what happens in between. In Agile sales, we're more able to adjust things like quota, budgets based on what's happening in a particular region, what's happening in a particular area of the portfolio. So we look at things not as okay, this is your target and that's that, and by God, everything has to, but how can we adapt during the sales cycle? How can we be more responsive to situations? And again, that may be a new customer that's taking up more time, an investment that a sales rep has to make, even if there isn't an immediate return. Because in a digital enterprise, we no longer can necessarily use the old accounting return on investment. We're sometimes having to make big bets based on leading indicators. So I hope that that's a little bit of a flavor that Agile is coming into many different organizations and basically bringing about an evolution to thinking about things in much smaller cycles. And it's no longer about hitting a preconceived target as it is responding in the best possible way to the circumstances that are presented. And then I'll say why way of life. Okay, according to you, according to me, Agile is a mindset. Now, we have definitely different frameworks, Agile frameworks for project management methodology, right? Like Scrum, for example, is in some respects project management or work management methodology. But that is an Agile practice. It is an Agile method. Agile itself is the principles and the values. So any framework that you see, whether it's enterprise level, scaled Agile, Kanban, Scrum, that's doing Agile. What we hope that we can, in a digital enterprise, is come to the point where we are Agile. It's in our DNA, it's how we think, and it's how we work. Amy, I'm not sure, or Karen, if we have time for any more. I see it's close to 1, but I'll go on as long as you give me rope.
Hi, Marguerite. Yes, we are reaching the end of our webinar, so I wanted to say thank you to you for your time, and I hope everybody else enjoyed this. And please feel free to keep sending questions if you want, and we will send you an email with answers to that. So thank you very much, Marguerite.
Yes, and I thank you and also those of you who attended. I hope I'll see you out there at a conference or a classroom or perhaps at your enterprise sometime in 2019. It'll be an exciting year ahead. Thank you.